going to be giving the keynote Thursday morning on the Part D benefit, which, as you know, is turning 16 years old this year. So Babette's going to be talking about how the benefit has evolved over 16 years and how it has changed and what it sort of looks like today relative to what it looked like when it launched 16 years ago. Then I'm going to be talking about what it's going to be looking like, or what we think it's going to be looking like looking ahead into the future, including just this week, CMS has released a lot of data about what the plans into 2022 are going to be looking like. An interesting takeaway, one of the new options for 2022 that the Trump administration implemented that some people thought that the plans might jump on with an option for 2 specialty tiers. We did not see a lot of plans pick up that option for 2022. And then, of course, the big question that everybody wants to know more about is what Congress is going to do, looking even further down the road with reconciliation and drug price negotiation, any sort of out-of-pocket cap for beneficiaries, and anything like that. Of course, that's like 2023 and beyond. But so those are sort of the big 2 takeaways from my portion of the presentation. I think they're trying to move towards a benefit design that is less confusing for beneficiaries, especially I think when you come to out-of-pocket costs, and I think smoothing out-of-pocket costs, especially for beneficiaries. I mean, they're limited by the statutory requirements of the benefit design to a certain extent with what they can do. But I think especially when you look at things like the Part D senior savings model, some of the things that they're doing with the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation, I do think that they're trying to use some of those authorities, to the extent they're able to do that. I know that, again, one of the things that the Trump administration was working on trying to do with the senior savings model was to give the participants a little bit more flexibility with formulary coverage requirements. They were looking to relax the rule that plans had to cover 2 drugs in each category or class. The Biden administration ended up rolling that back. And now they're actually going to end that model early due to lack of interest and participation. But that I think was indicative of an attempt by at least the Trump administration of trying to modernize the program. But I think mainly the onus is on Congress to really try to modernize it. And I think you're seeing that as more and more high-cost drugs are coming out. The impact of the out-of-pocket costs on beneficiaries is becoming the focus of what Congress and CMS are really looking at. The donut hole is closed with the manufacturer rebate. The beneficiaries are still just paying the 25% that they're paying under the initial coverage limit. So to them, they should see no change. The interesting thing is from a manufacturer perspective, because the plans have less financial liability between the coverage gap and then catastrophic coverage. The manufacturers have the bulk of the financial liability in the coverage gap, and then the government has the bulk of the financial liability in the catastrophic coverage. Plans actually sort of have an incentive to get beneficiaries into the coverage gap and then into catastrophic coverage. And so that is something that manufacturers and then outside groups like MedPAC have been pointing out to Congress for several years now. So as Congress has been sitting down to look at things like redesigning Part D, you are seeing them start to look at transferring more financial liability to plans for these higher cost drugs. So I do think not only once we look at catastrophic coverage, but I think also looking at potentially the donut hole, is the donut hole and the distribution of financial liability in the donut hole an area that Congress might look at as a way or an area where they might look for some money, especially when you're talking about trying to maybe compromise with pharmaceutical manufacturers on something like drug price negotiation. Can you maybe get some support back from them if you give them something back on lower manufacturer rebates in the coverage gap or something? I don't know. So it will be interesting to see if that becomes sort of a bargaining chip as Congress continues to work on the various redesign proposals. It really is one of the things that seems to be holding up a lot of the reconciliation negotiations. I think the progressive caucus in the House and in the Senate seem to be holding a very firm line on this. This also seems to be something that the more moderate Democrats in the Senate and to a certain extent in the House are also holding a firm line on. It is interesting. I think that, when you look at the polling, it is something that polls exceptionally well across all, ideologies. It's a matter of political parties. It has something like 80% support. If you just ask Americans, should Medicare negotiate prescription drug prices? But the interesting thing is once you start looking a little bit deeper and you start asking questions like, should Medicare block coverage of certain prescription drugs? You start asking about some of the potential consequences of a policy, such as Medicare negotiation of prescription drug prices. Support for the consequences, however, starts to drop. And so I don't know if you can necessarily take that top line, 80% of Americans support, Medicare negotiation of prescription drug prices as some sort of a, validation that this is a slam dunk policy. On the other hand, I do think it is something that sort of clearly has support. Doing something, and I'm saying something kind of with air quotes here, doing something to reduce prescription drug prices is a Americans want Congress to do something about prescription drug prices, and this is a thing that they have been saying for a very long time, and so I do think that Congress at some point needs to deliver something. I think that it's going to be hard to thread the needle. Are they going to be able to pull something off where maybe they can do a limited, targeted negotiation deal that's focused on a narrow set of high cost, maybe high visibility drugs that are high volume and sort of deliver a big impact to sort of a large number of beneficiaries that maybe from an industry perspective have like a kind of a relatively limited impact across the industry. Maybe that's something that they can thread the needle on and work out. I know that I've seen several op-eds recently where you start to talk about, analyses that have shown, government negotiation of prescription drug prices are likely to lead to fewer innovation. We all recognize that, but what are we talking about? Are we talking about fewer Me Too drugs that we may or may not really miss? Or are we talking about fewer, blockbuster treatments, or fewer orphan treatments or something like that? I think that there's always going to be a market for something like a gene therapy that's, a cure for an incurable disease or something like that, when we will always be willing to pay top dollar. But what are the therapies that we're talking about that might not make it through this new potential paradigm? And so I do think it will be interesting to see. I think that the overall situation is growing like more and more tenuous for Congress to get nothing done. They're going to have to deliver something to the American people. And so I think the longer they wait, their ability to kind of, I think, if it makes sense, their ability to deliver something that is like well tailored and probably that's kind of smartly designed and might actually have less, or kind of like have the least collateral damage to the industry, probably actually diminishes in some way. And it'll probably, unfortunately, end up kind of being like a sledgehammer at the end of the day. But unfortunately, because at some point, there's just going to have to be something that has to happen. But I do think as the window is closing, but I do kind of think I'm losing a little bit of hope. But I was holding out a little bit of hope that there might be a way that they could have done like a narrowly tailored, targeted, focused effort that really just kind of looked at, not 250 drugs, but like the top like 25 drugs or something like that to deliver, meaningful savings to a large number of beneficiaries, but you're just kind of limiting the damage to the industry as a whole, or the collateral impact of the industry as a whole, while still delivering meaningful savings to a large number of beneficiaries. But it remains to be seen if they can actually do something like that when they're not sort of in like panic mode at the 23rd hour.